Hello everyone, and welcome to a very festive first ever episode of LItbashing, the show where the L stands for Legions, the I stands for Imperialis, and the Tabashing stands for Kitbashing. My name is Matty, and I will be your guide through this wacky world of LItbashing. Whilst there's plenty of STLs and 3D printing options available for epic-style games out there, and 3D modelling is a very worthy hobby in its own right, don't get me wrong, it isn't my hobby. My hobby is good old-fashioned physical modelling using the tools and materials available to us on Games Workshop shelves. This means a little more work, a lot more risk because there's no undo button with a bit of plastic and a scalpel, but a lot of potential reward. If nothing else, it means Warhammer World-safe models that you can show off at tournaments to make you stand out amongst the literally thousands of other teeny-tiny models on the table. To start off with, I've chosen one of my favourite glorious bastards of the 3rd Legion, Eidolon the Exemplar, because who else better to be the example of what this channel can do? So let's look at our example. My existing and pretty old now Forge World resin Eidolon. We're going to spend a bit of time looking at him, not just to marvel in his amazing hairdo, but to identify what are the key features that make Eidolon Eidolon. This isn't the Alpha Legion. We want to be able to identify our commander from 3 feet away. Not easy with a model about 9mm tall. You'll hear a lot of painters and sculptors at epic scale refer to something called readability, and this doesn't mean I can read the Roman numerals on this Legion's shin pads, although we will get to that later. It's about how easy it is to interpret what's happening in a piece of art. Yes, that could be a literal reading of a novel, how clear is the kerning and all the vocabulary accessible, but for us it's going to be the details we add to our minis to improve clarity, or muddy it. It may be clear from a zoomed-in image what this Bible written on a grain of rice is, but if it's on a table 2 feet away, it just looks like a dirty grain of rice. So at every step we need to look at what makes Eidolon Eidolon, and what will translate to our epic scale. Interestingly, our classic heroic scale minis are also a result of readability. Scaled up hands and faces means a 28mm model scanned up to 6 foot would have very strange proportions indeed, as shown by the many stick figures drawn over Terminators asking how Space Marine shoulders work. But for our 28mm scale, it's ideal. We get more interesting readable detail for the important bits, and less of the rest, like one of those sensory medical textbook homunculi. Anyway, we need to do that at epic scale. So with Eidolon we have 3 key things that set him apart from other similar commanders. There's his whopping great hammer, and only Eidolon can make a power hammer seem graceful. There's his trademark Mark IV jump pack with bonus speakers for voxing as loud as he can, and his luscious locks. Now he does come with an alternate helmet head, but remember we're looking for readability. At epic scale the slightly different helmet isn't going to read Eidolon, but long grey hair, that's going to be the ticket. For a bonus, although we're not beholden to the pose of the 30k mini, if we can represent this big glorious tactical dreadnought shoulder, all the better. So where can we find these key features? Well, let's turn to our teeny tiny infantry sprue. The easiest on the list is the hammer, because we have a wonderful little Terminator captain here with a big fat hammer, Dick. This will need some careful shaving off the body later on, and we move on to our main body. And for this there is really only one option, the standard Praetor from the command squad. He has the flowing cape, regal demeanour, and even the feel in the perfect tactical dreadnought position, albeit a mirror image to his big brother. Alternatively, this Axe Assault Marine has legs in the same position, the same way round as Eidolon, so perhaps we could do some missing and matching. That's something to consider later. This Assault Marine does, however, have a jump pack. Annoyingly it's a Mark 6, not a Mark 4, but this isn't the end of the world. Remember, readability at an epic scale. Is it obviously a jump pack? Then a lot can be forgiven. However, do remember that because there is a solution which counts for both accuracy and readability that I stumble upon later in the process. This Marine also has a traditional pistol arm, so as we're chopping him up anyway, might as well make use of all the bits we can. Also important to note here is a fun axe arm, not necessarily useful for Eidolon, but for any World Eaters conversions in the future this is a very desirable bit to keep. So let's snip out our 3 prime culprits. The Terminator, what with the hammer, the Assault Marine, what with the jump pack, and the Praetor, what with the, well, everything else. I'm using a really old pair of snippers because I'm trimming the sprue itself to give me something to hold on, and I don't want to dent a decent pair of snippers. And that's definitely the reason, and not that I don't know where I put my decent snippers after putting the Christmas decorations up. Let's compare to Eidolon then. Particularly, let's look at the Praetor's pose. It really is very similar, albeit a mirror image. Here I'm very carefully considering whether to use the existing legs or to swap, and I decide keep the legs. I'm sure Eidolon didn't walk around on the battlefield only stopping with his left foot raised, so he can be backwards. It's about the readability, and after all, perfection is surely ambidextrous. Now we begin to trim. We are aiming to remove both arms from underneath the shoulder pads and smooth out any areas there left. We also want to remove the middle of the backpack. Let's get started. I'm using a brand new scalpel blade for accuracy and cleanness of cut, and don't worry about my fingers here. I don't cut myself for a couple of steps yet. I'll let you know when it happens. Here's our trimmed mini. You can see once I'm in focus that both arms have been cleanly removed from the torso, the centre of the backpack is gone, and I've also shaved the beak off the helmet. Note I did not touch the brows. Readability. At this scale you are not going to get a readable face, and thankfully Eidolon's head is quite deep set into his armour. We keep the brow of the helmet to become the head's strong brow, and we use some careful highlights to give the impression of a nose and a top lip when we come to painting. Look at your nose now, and imagine how small it would be if your face was a millimetre big. Absolutely unrecognisable. Your eye sockets, however, much more important to the face. Now let's get his new arms ready. The hammer will come off quite easily, though I may have to trim beyond the fist as the end of the hammer is likely to be in the folds of his cloak. Similarly, we'll need to trim the gun arm off this dude and a few bits off his jump pack. Thanks to the magic of editing, here's a hammer. Here's a little bit of a jump pack I cut off because I thought it might be useful. It wasn't. And here's the useful bit of a jump pack, one of the big rocket boosters from the Mark VI. And the idea is that this single booster represents the round booster of the more elegant Mark IV, as long as it fits into this gap on the Praetor. And in the video recording, there was an audible celebration when I realised it fit perfectly. It's like it was planned. It wasn't. Here I checked to see if that bit would be useful. It would not be. And here, the jump pack is attached and ready. Now, we put on the arms. The hammer with a bit of trimming fit in like Lego. Or you can also see on my finger here the first cut of the channel. It wasn't even during a chop, it was me forgetting which way round I had the scalpel and grabbing it wrong. I'm sure it's the first of many more to come. This is an opportunity for me to say I have very optimistically started a Patreon to help me get better filming set up for future videos, but you could also use it to buy me plasters and steri strips. Every little helps. Anyway, here is the piece de resistance of the jump pack. I snipped the top fence off the Mark VI jump pack and skinnied them down a little with careful cuts, stuck them back together closer together, and now they're going to be stuck on top of Eidolon. This has the benefit of covering any unsightly join between neck and pack, and represents those two big Vox speakers Massivalon has. Note they are not to scale, but the originals are so thin that they just wouldn't read at epic scale. They'd look like two horns. So artistic license means we can emphasise them a bit more, improving that important readability. Here he is, fully kitbashed. No more plastic required for Eidolon himself, and I'm already feeling pretty happy that he's going to paint up nicely. Already I'm looking at him and I think, there's no one else in the game he could really be, which is a serious result, which means now we move on to his base. In-game he is going to represent a command squad, so he'll be using one of the standard 25mm bases. He does look a little drowned on it, on his little tactical rock. You may remember I said Fulgrim standing on a Derrideo shoulder. Well, I'm not going to do that. One, because the Derrideo hasn't been released yet, and two, when it is released, I'm going to want them all. We do, however, have a Contemptor shoulder we can play with. It leaves me with an odd number of Contemptors, but let's face it, I'm not going to do a Fall of Rylanor dilemma at some point, aren't I? So let's go choppy with this dread. And here's the base. As I said, this will be a command squad, and whilst I'm not a stickler for WYSIWYG, and Eidolon is definitely important enough to carry the weight of 5 minis, let's give him a little bit of support with a standard bearer and Medicae along with him. 3 to a base, 1 on a tactical dreadnought shoulder is surely enough to satisfy even the most stringent of opponents that this is indeed a command squad. So here he is. I should note that I'm using plastic cement for all these joins. It's so fiddly that knowing I've got a good melted bond between pieces will limit the chances of a piece going off never to be seen again. I'm using a technical paint here to blend the dread into the base and to add some rust. I want this mini to represent Eidolon standing proud atop the remains of the Precentaur's palace, the first wave of filthy loyalists burned up by virus bombs and Eidolon making planetfall to clear up the chaff. So some nice degraded, almost melted remains of the earlier Death Guard loyalists to drop is nice and thematic. Oh, spoilers by the way, the Emperor's children are traitors. Eidolon's friends will surround him, framing their captain, giving a nice composition to the piece. I always like a mini's highest point to be at the top left, so our eyes can start at the top and read towards the bottom right like a book. Here we are comparing the pose so far, and it's pretty good. There's just 2 things to perfect it. Those aforementioned locks of hair, and a nice big wing on the shoulder pad. For this we go to green stuff, and we need so little. The little blob I made here so we could have 5 of these guys. I measure out the wing using the triangle of the scalpel, so I know that's a good angle, and I use a tiny bit of super glue to keep the sausage of green stuff on the head whilst I pull it down into strands. I sculpt using the scalpel itself as it's the sharpest point I have, keeping it regularly wet. Slaanesh would approve. So here's the hair complete, definitely a worthy addition. The wing I sculpted on a piece of the sprue just to give me a flat surface, and once dry I then used superglue to stick it to the model. Here it is complete, front and back. I also used a little green stuff to add some trim to the backpack, and then moved on to paint. I started with a prime of Chaos Black. There are other, arguably better primers out there, but I know Chaos Black inside and out, and it's so reliable even in this cold wintry season, and I couldn't risk losing detail at such a small scale. It's also a little bit shinier than my other primers, which meant I could see the edges and highlights better. I did not zenithal this model. I imagine I will for most of the rank and file, using zenithal and washes and contrast, but for this model I wanted to use traditional layering up from black to help it pop and keep those really dark shadows. This is what it looked like after the first layer. I used Gazeria's purple, rust grey, and Runelord brass on all the areas that would be purple, white and gold respectively. I love rust grey as a base for white because it's got this nice bluiness that adds to the shadows and brings out my mini's eyes, which you'll see later. The base was given a once-over with Xandri dust, and the muddy, rusty bits were painted with Catachan flesh. This means the base will have a yellowy tinge, which everyone's favourite colour theory says will make my purple mini pop. Slaanesh is nodding again. I also painted the Contemptor and Death Guard colours along with GW's own recommended recipe. Here's a nice slow turnaround to show you that it's definitely table ready with just a layer. You could stop here if you like. Alternatively, I could use this extended cut to remind you all to like and subscribe so I can make another one of these. Please let me know your suggestions in the comments for what you'd like to see next. Any Legion-specific units, models you don't think will get an official epic release, 40k themed epic conversions, classic battles or moments from the lore. I want your suggestions. Nothing is too wild. We either create something amazing or we crash and burn together, and I am here for it. So as I said, feel free to stop your model here and say that's enough. Alternatively, let's turn this from tabletop to a centrepiece smaller than our thumbnails. And the first step to that is to wash the base in Seraphim Sepia. This is the only shade I use in this paint job, but it's important to bring out those lovely details in the base. I'm also going to use a little desert rust on the Contemptor to show that it's been here so long and the virus bombs were even able to start oxidising the ceramite. The next step is a second layer using Genestealer Purple, Liberator Gold and White Star, which is fast becoming my favourite pure white to use on Emperor's Children. Next transition, we'll see the final layer. Here's the sexy beast, the Exemplar himself. I used a Kala Lilac to edge highlight the purple and add some battle damage to their noble shins. I also used Runefang Steel as a dot highlight on the gold and any other metal. The banner was mostly freehand based on my favourite of the full-size banners from the official transfer sheet, but the 3 at the bottom was from the aircraft transfer sheet and then painted over with a little black and a line of white scar to add some detail. I just didn't want to risk missing the middle and having it off-centre. Finally, I added the teensiest dot of ray gun glow for the eyes, which was nerve-wracking to say the least. Though I'm used to Citadel colours, Mr. Rowe's new range really is second to none for the real detail work straight from the pot. If you want a colour to look on the mini like how it looks in the pot, give it a go. The base was given a dry brush with Corax White. The slightly off-white grey-yellow really helps to sell that this is a ruined palace, pearly white but stained by the horrific events of the slaughter. And that's the model. I just thought I'd show you how I filmed this. This is my kitchen table and my camera stand was my phone stellar-taped to a broom handle, so whenever you see both my hands, this is what's happening. If anyone has any recommendations for setup or fancies joining my Patreon to help me afford said setup, that'd be swell. Thank you all for watching. Please do like and subscribe and spread the word to anyone epically minded, and please comment with what you'd like to see next. And if you do join my Patreon, anything I make in the future that doesn't directly fit into any of my armies, for example filthy loyalists, I'll put up for a raffle, and anyone involved in my Patreon can have a chance of winning a completed piece. This has been LItbashing. I have been Matty, and I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and the teensiest, tiniest battles around. Peace and love.